The woman standing in Hank Pruitt's doorway wasn't supposed to still be there. She was supposed to have disappeared with the dawn, taken her silence and her fear back down the mountain road. Instead, she stood barefoot in his kitchen wearing his spare shirt, frying eggs like she'd lived there all her life. 3 days earlier, Hank had heard the knock. Soft, almost apologetic. The kind of sound that said the person on the other side wasn't sure they deserved to be heard. It was past midnight. Snow fell thick and steady across his Montana ranch, muffling the world. He'd been awake anyway, unable to sleep the way he'd been unable to sleep for the 2 years since Catherine died. The cabin felt too empty, the silence too loud. He opened the door. She stood in a pool of lamplight, snow gathering on her dark hair and worn coat. 35, maybe 40. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. A small canvas bag hung from one shoulder. "I'm sorry to trouble you," she said. Her voice was educated, careful. "I saw your light from the road. I wondered if I might sleep in your barn tonight." Hank studied her. No horse, no wagon. Her boots were good quality, but falling apart. Her coat had been mended more than once. "How long you been walking?" 2 days. "From where?" She hesitated. "Billings." That was 60 miles through mountain passes in November snow. No one walked 60 miles by choice. "Barn's drafty," he said. "You'll freeze." "I've slept in worse." Something in the way she said it told him that was true. "I have a spare room," he offered. "Small, but it's got a stove." Her eyes widened slightly. Fear flickered there, then something else. Calculation. "I can pay," she said quickly. "Not money, but I can work. I cook. I clean. I sew." Didn't ask for payment. She studied him carefully, searching his face for the lies she expected to find. When she didn't find it, her shoulders sagged. "Just one night," she said quietly. He stepped aside. She moved past him like a ghost, barely disturbing the air. Up close, he saw the exhaustion carved into her face, the way her hands trembled slightly. This wasn't a woman down on her luck. This was a woman running. He showed her the small room off the kitchen. It had been Catherine's sewing room once. Now it held a narrow bed and a potbelly stove already warming the space. "Wash basin's there," he said, pointing. "Privy's out back, but there's a chamber pot under the bed." She nodded, still clutching her back. "You eaten?" he asked. "I'm fine." Her stomach chose that moment to growl audibly. A flush crept up her neck. "I'll make coffee," he said, leaving before she could argue. She emerged 10 minutes later, having washed her face and hands. He'd set out cold chicken, biscuits, and preserves. She ate slowly at first, trying to maintain dignity. Then hunger won. She ate like someone who hadn't seen real food in days. He didn't ask questions. She didn't offer explanations. When she finished, she stood and began clearing the table. "Leave it," he said. "You fed me. I'll clean. You're exhausted." "I'm capable." There was steel beneath the exhaustion. He recognized it because he'd worn it himself after the war, that stubborn refusal to be pitted. He nodded and let her work. She washed every dish, wiped down the table, swept the floor. Her movements were efficient, practiced. When she finished, she turned to him. "Thank you," she said, "for your kindness. Get some rest." She disappeared into the small room and closed the door quietly. Hank sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Catherine had been gone 2 years. In that time, no one had stepped foot in this cabin except old Moses, his nearest neighbor, checking on him occasionally. The silence had become normal. Expected. Now it felt different. The cabin felt less like a tomb. Morning came cold and clear. Hank woke before dawn, as always, and started coffee. He expected to find the small room empty, the woman gone like a dream. Instead, she emerged fully dressed, her dark hair pinned up neatly. "I thought you'd left," he said. "I wanted to thank you properly first." She moved to the stove and began cooking without asking permission. Within 20 minutes, she'd made eggs, fried potatoes, and fresh biscuits that filled the cabin with a smell he hadn't encountered in 2 years. They ate in silence. The food was good, better than good. When they finished, she stood and began cleaning again. "You don't have to. You fed me, sheltered me. This is what I can offer in return." He watched her work. There was something calming about her presence, something that made the cabin feel less empty without feeling crowded. "What's her name?" he asked. She paused, hands in the wash basin. "Grace," she said quietly. "Grace Hartley. Hank Pruitt." She nodded and returned to washing dishes. "Where were you headed?" he asked. When you knocked last night. Her hand stilled. Anywhere that wasn't Billings. The weight in those words told him everything and nothing. Grace stayed 3 days. She never asked. Hank never offered. It simply happened, one morning sliding into the next with an ease that surprised them both. She cooked breakfast before he woke. She mended his shirts without being asked. She organized his chaotic pantry and swept corners that hadn't seen a broom in months. In return, he chopped extra firewood for her room, brought in fresh water before she needed it, and pretended not to notice when she flinched at sudden movements. On the third evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, he finally asked, "What are you running from?" She'd been knitting, her hands moving steadily through the motions. They stopped. "A man," she said quietly. "My husband. He hurt you." It wasn't a question. She nodded once, sharp and quick, like ripping off a bandage. "For 8 years," she continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "He was careful. Never anywhere that showed. Never in front of others. A respected banker in Billings. Everyone thought him charming." Hank's jaw tightened. "I left twice before," she said. "Each time he found me. Brought me back. The third time, he said if I tried again, he'd make sure I never walked away from anything." "So you walked 60 miles through snow." "He thinks I went to my sister in Denver. I let him think that. I walked the opposite direction instead." Smart, Hank thought. Desperate, but smart. "Will he look here?" "He doesn't know here exists." She met his eyes. "But he's a determined man. Eventually, he'll realize I lied. He'll look everywhere." The fire crackled between them. "How long before that happens?" Hank asked. "A month. Maybe 2. Then you've got time to rest." She stared at him. "You're not sending me away?" "Didn't say that." "You're not asking me to leave." He set down his coffee cup. "Woman walks 60 miles in November snow to escape a man who hurts her. I figure she's earned the right to catch her breath." Tears welled in her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. "I won't be a burden," she said. "I'll earn my keep. I can, Grace." His voice was gentle but firm. "You don't have to earn safety." The tears spilled over then, silent and swift. She covered her face with her hands. Hank stood awkwardly, uncertain. Catherine had cried sometimes, and he'd known how to comfort her. But Grace wasn't Catherine, and he wasn't sure his comfort was wanted. He settled for pouring her fresh coffee and leaving it on the table beside her. When her tears subsided, she looked up at him. "Why are you helping me?" "You thought about that." "My Catherine," he said slowly. "She died 2 years back. Fever took her in 3 days. I couldn't do anything to stop it." He stared into his coffee. "Man gets tired of feeling helpless. Maybe this is something I can do." She nodded, understanding more than he'd said. The days turned into a week. Then 2. Grace settled into the rhythm of the ranch as if she'd always been there. She learned to feed the chickens without spooking them. She helped mend fence posts when the weather allowed. She sang quietly while she cooked, old hymns that filled the cabin with something besides silence. Hank found himself smiling more, talking more. The weight he'd carried since Catherine's death felt lighter, not gone, but bearable. Then, 3 weeks after Grace's arrival, a rider came up the mountain road. Hank saw him from the barn. Well-dressed, riding a fine bay horse. He carried himself with the confidence of a man used to being obeyed. Grace stepped out of the cabin and froze. The color drained from her face. "Grace," the man called, his voice warm and pleasant. "Thank God. I've been so worried." Hank moved toward the house, positioning himself between them. The man dismounted smoothly, removing his hat. He was handsome, clean-shaven, his smile perfect. "You must be the kind soul who took in my poor, confused wife," he said, extending his hand to Hank. "Marcus Hartley. I can't thank you enough for keeping her safe." Hank didn't take the offered hand. Grace stood rigid on the porch, her knuckles white where she gripped the railing. "Grace has been telling me she doesn't want to go back," Hank said quietly. Marcus's smile never wavered. "My wife suffers from nervous episodes. The doctor in Billings will confirm it. She becomes confused, says things she doesn't mean." He turned to Grace. "Darling, let's go home. I've been so worried." "I'm not going," Grace said. Her voice shook, but it was clear. Marcus's smile tightened. "Grace, don't make a scene." "I'm not making a scene. I'm staying. You're my wife." The warmth had left his voice. "You belong with me." "She's asked you to leave," Hank said. Marcus turned to him. The pleasant mask had slipped. Beneath it was something cold and hard. "This is none of your concern, friend. Grace is my legal wife. She's coming home. No. The single word hum in the cold air. Marcus's hand moved toward his coat. Hank's hand dropped to the rifle he'd leaned against the porch post that morning. Don't, Hank said quietly. Marcus Hartley stood very still, his hand hovering near his coat. The pleasant mask was completely gone now. What remained was something sharp and dangerous. You're threatening me, Marcus said softly. Over a hysterical woman you've known for 3 weeks. I'm telling you to leave, Hank replied. There's a difference. I could have the sheriff up here by tomorrow. She's legally my wife. You're harboring her unlawfully. Then bring the sheriff. Hank's voice was steady. Bring a judge, too. Let's talk in front of witnesses about how a respected banker's wife walks 60 miles through snow to escape him. Let's discuss what kind of home makes a woman that desperate. Marcus's jaw clenched. You don't know what you're doing, he said. You don't know her. She lies. She manipulates. She flinches when doors slam. Hank interrupted. She checks the windows every hour. She sleeps in her clothes in case she needs to run. He stepped closer. I know enough. For a long moment, no one moved. The wind swept across the mountain, carrying fresh snow. Then Marcus laughed. It was an ugly sound. Keep her, he said. You'll learn. Women like Grace are nothing but trouble. He swung back onto his horse. But when she runs from you too, don't come crying to me. He rode away without looking back. Hank waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded before lowering the rifle. Grace hadn't moved from the porch. She stood frozen, shaking violently. He's gone, Hank said gently. She looked at him with wide, terrified eyes. He'll come back. Let him come back. He won't find what he expects. That night, Hank rode to Moses's ranch and returned with 3 things. Moses himself, Father Mackenzie from the small church in the valley, and a legal document Moses had insisted on drafting. They gathered in Hank's cabin. Grace sat at the table, confused and exhausted. Marcus isn't wrong about the law, Hank said quietly. You're his legal wife. He can claim you, unless you're not his wife anymore. Divorce? Grace shook her head. That could take years. Cost money I don't have. And he'd fight it. Not divorce, Moses said. Annulment. Father Mackenzie knows a judge in Helena. Sympathetic sort. With the right testimony about cruelty, fraud, duress. It could be done in a month. Father Mackenzie finished gently. I've written to Judge Crawford. He's already responded. He'll hear the case. Grace stared at them. Why would you do this? Because it's right, Moses said simply. For weeks later, Grace Hartley stood in a Helena courtroom. Marcus didn't appear. His lawyer argued briefly, but without conviction. When Judge Crawford asked Grace to describe her marriage, she spoke clearly and honestly. The judge's face grew harder with each sentence. The annulment was granted. Grace walked out of that courthouse a free woman. Spring came to the Montana mountains slowly, melting snow giving way to wildflowers. Grace planted a garden behind the cabin, her hands steady in the dark soil. She no longer flinched at sudden sounds. She no longer checked the windows every hour. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she turned to Hank. I've saved enough from selling my preserves in town, she said. I could find a place of my own soon. You've been more than generous. Hank was quiet for a long moment. You remember that first morning? He asked. When I found you cooking breakfast? I remember. I woke up, and for the first time in 2 years, the cabin didn't feel empty. He looked at her. It still doesn't. She met his eyes. I'm not asking for anything, he continued. I'm just saying, if you wanted to stay, you'd be welcome. As long as you wanted. As what? She asked softly. Your boarder? Your housekeeper? As whatever you choose to be. She studied his weathered face, his gentle eyes, the hands that had never been raised in anger toward her. I'd like to stay, she said quietly. If the offer stands. It stands. 2 years passed. Grace's garden flourished. She became known throughout the valley for her cooking and her sharp eye for numbers. When the valley school needed a teacher for arithmetic, she took the position. Hank's ranch prospered with her careful management of accounts and supplies. They married quietly one autumn morning, with Moses and Father Mackenzie as witnesses. It wasn't passion or romance. It was something steadier. Partnership. Trust. 2 people who'd both been broken finding ways to be whole together. That winter, when snow fell thick and heavy across the mountain, Grace stood in the doorway watching Hank chop firewood. He looked up, caught her watching, and smiled. She smiled back. Once, She had knocked on this door desperate and terrified, asking only for shelter in his barn. He'd offered a room instead, then safety, then freedom, finally a home. She'd asked for one night. He'd given her a lifetime. And somewhere in that exchange of kindness for trust, fear for safety, desperation for hope, two lonely people had found something neither had been looking for, but both desperately needed. They'd found each other.